again. Welcome back to my channel. This is my second diptych, which is a set of two paintings that are meant to be hung together side by side, either really close like this or slightly apart. But I'm going to treat them as a diptych, but I'm also going to show you how you can keep the balance with each one individually. I'm going to use a limited color palette of green gold and Paynes gray. They're going to give me lovely shades of blue and green. And I'm going to use some script stamps today. Use whatever you have. It's up to you, but I'm just showing a variety of based on the stamps that I myself have. I've got the script stamps that I'm going to use as a background overall, and then I've got this extra little squiggly line and some straight lines that I'm going to put here and there just for a little bit of pop. I've got my gel plate that I will use as my palette for my palette and for rolling paint down with the brayer, and then I can use that as a stamp pad instead of an ink pad, which would give too dark of a line or perhaps not waterproof. So this is the stamp I've got, and it actually coincidentally fits perfectly my 6 by 6 inch cradled wood frames. But I don't want to do left and right exactly the same because I want this to be asymmetrical. So I'm going to rotate that stamp once I put it down onto the wood canvas. So this is directly from the bottle, Paynes Gray, and you'll see when I spread it out, it's quite a dark indigo navy kind of color, like an original pair of denim jeans. I love this color. I think I put that on a little too heavy, but we shall see because I'm going to test it on a piece of paper before I go and put it on my panels. And what I find is it's just a little too dark. It almost looks like black. So I'd like to sort of remove some of that and make it a little less obvious. I'm going to add some white onto the gel plate and hopefully try to lighten that up just a little bit. By the way, those wood panels have been painted with one coat of regular textured white paint right out of the tub, and I let that dry. So this looks a little lighter on the gel plate. Let's see how that impression goes when I stamp it. It still looks really dark. It's hard to tell. It is lighter, but I'm going to add even more white. Now remember, this is as my typical style. My technique is to do a busy underpainting first, and that's why this looks really, really busy. And I don't mind if it's a bit dark because I can lighten that later on. I'm going to turn and rotate that so that every area of that 6 by 6 inch stamp gets the acrylic paint on it. And I'm going to fit it right over top and press down firmly. And that came out a little lighter. I'm pleased with that. So let's repeat that process. But this time, remember, I do not want to put the stamp down the same way. I want to rotate it so that that flower there is in two different spots instead of the same. And that kind of helps draw the eye around the panels. Because remember, I'm treating this as a diptych, which means it will look nice on its own as one long rectangular painting. And now I've got a different stamp, which is also script, and I'm using that because it's smaller to put a similar script around randomly around the edges. I want to do just like my last diptych. This is a nice deep canvas, wood canvas, and I want to have those sides all revealed once the painting is finished. I just think it adds a lot more depth and dimension and interest when it's hanging on a wall, or even if they're individually on a little stand. I will be showing this at my market coming up where there's side by side on little mini wooden easels, but I think if you're going to hang these as diptychs, they look better if you hang them together on a wall. If you want to have them sitting on a little easel on a shelf, for example, I think they look better as individual. That's just my personal opinion. So I'm going to rotate that. I don't want that orientation because they're too identical. I want to switch it up so that it gives more movement around the page And that's even better because it puts those two flowers in different positions, and it adds a little bit of rhythm and movement around the two. So that's the way I'm going to keep it oriented for now. Remember, this is just an underpainting. We've got a lot of work to do. I'm going to lift all of that. I was first going to just roll a little bit and see what happens, but because this brayer happens to be very rubbery, some of them aren't as rubbery, but because it's rubbery, it's actually lifting and cleaning that entire gel plate. So woohoo, that worked out great for me. I like to keep the gel plate clean before the paint all dries on it. I'm going to use the Paynes gray again in a little dish, and I'm adding a lot of white. There's a lot. It's probably 2/3 paint, Paynes gray, and 1/3 white. And I just want to add more white to it. What I'm trying to do is get a glaze now of a lighter blue, so I can paint the entire canvases with a solid shade of color. And I want to make it very transparent so that the font, script, stamps below will show up. Again, do this when the first stamping layer is completely dry. I let that dry completely before I did this next step. I'm going to put a whole bunch of water sprayed on top of the surface so that when I put this down, it becomes even more transparent. And I'm just moving it all. It doesn't look transparent now, but believe me, it will. I'm not finished yet. So I'm just moving it with a soft big brush all around the two canvases and giving it an asymmetrical balance and making sure that I get some of it wherever it's touched the edges. I want that to run right down over the sides for a continuation of the theme. I just think it'll be more interesting having these on a stand or hanging on a wall if the sides are painted. If it was a thinner, not so deep of a canvas, I wouldn't worry so much. I wouldn't mind having in either white sides or black sides and just the painting on the top. But because they're deep, I think this is way more fun. I've got a clean paper towel with a texture on it, and before this dries, I'm pressing hard on it to lift some of the paint off, and hopefully it will leave a little bit of the pattern from the paper towel, and yes, it did. And that's quite interesting. Now I'm going to lose this when I spray water over it, but I wanted to show you that that is a method that you can do, and I do it often if I want texture and pattern in my background. I think it's quite fun, and you could let it dry like this, but I want to dab it back because I don't want such a dark background. I want to keep this diptych as a very romantic, soft, subtle, soft shades of colors. So I don't want it to be too loud. So I'm going to dab that back, and I'm going to spray water as well to disperse even more of this. And it becomes even more transparent and reveals more of the background everywhere. And I'm helping it along by dabbing any of the areas that I find are too dark and just keeping it subtle. That's interesting how it formed two circles around those two dots there, and I'm going to keep that. Who knows? Who knows how that will work for me later on. I'm spraying even more water before it dries because I want to even make this more subtle and soft. Busy but subtle and soft at the same time. And again, this is still an underpainting. I do many layers with my technique. And that's how you get happy surprises later on when you add more detail or collage tissue prints over it. It just makes it much more interesting. Now, before everything dries, I want to also, actually I did let it dry. I didn't do anything about dabbing the sides, but I can deal with that later. Let's do some stamping now of this green gold. I'm going to add a little bit of white to it as well, so I soften it a bit. But it's fairly, I'm basically going to roll this down now. I'm not adding any water because I want it fairly pasty so that I can use it as a stamp pad. So now I've got my stripes, and I want to do these randomly. It's not showing up too much, but that's okay. I don't want it to fight with the depth of color of the navy, but I want to make it show up. And it actually shows up in reality more so than what you see here, because I've got two strong lights shining down on my table, and that brightens everything up a little bit more than it will be naturally. I'm going to use this to get imprints of this stripe all over, all around all the edges, but in random pattern. Now I've got this squiggly line, and I'm going to place that in random places as well. And as you can see, when I zoom in, you can see how they do show up a little more than they originally did. And again, I don't want to fight with the navy. I don't want this to be as bright as that. I want layers of depth, and therefore depth of colors as well. So again, I'm just keeping this random, and I'm treating it as if it's a diptych, but they will look okay separate as well. So I'm just trying to find a balance around the canvases. Now I rolled that flat, and I want to add some more stamping, but in a lighter shade. And actually, I'm not going to stamp anymore. I'm making a milky green glaze. And again, this background stamping was dry before I did this. If I was to do this while it was wet, I would smear the stamping I just did. So what I want to do is make a milky glaze, and then again I will add more water so that this will disperse, and it will still allow some of that green stripe, those small stamps, it will allow some of those details to still show through. So I'm going to have 2 shades of green on here when this is done. You got to work fairly quickly because this will dry, and I do intend on spraying water and letting it disperse before it completely dries. But before I get there, I want to add more around the edges so that I don't miss any spots. Wherever it touches the edges on the top, I want that to run down to the sides wherever it applies. Again, just to add interest when it's hanging on the wall. So there we have that. Let's give it a spray of water and let all of that disperse even more. It becomes more of a glaze instead of a paint. And hopefully the green stamps that I put down first will pop out once this dries. And I'm just dabbing a little bit with Kleenex just to subdue it a little bit. Again, I do not want the green to be as dominant as the navy blue. I want it to be more of a secondary color. And yes, indeed, the darker green stamps that I put down with the stripes and the squiggles, they are going to pop forward. And I'm just helping it with a soft brush while it's still wet, making sure that I get the same effect on the sides to match the top. I love this color combination. So here it is dry. You can see both shades of green show up nicely. Both shades of blue show up nicely. Now I've got some clear gel gloss medium, and it looks milky, but it dries clear, and I'm adding white to it so that I could make, I want to do a slightly more opaque white glaze, but I don't want it to be so opaque that it covers up all this detail. So I'm doing about 2/3 glaze, matte medium or gloss medium, and 1/3 heavy white paste. And because I had still a little of that Paynes gray on my brush, it's picking up and going into that white, making it ever so slightly blue in that glaze. And I don't mind that because blue is my primary color. Again, this looks pretty milky, but it will dry a little more transparent. And you can see what's happening is I'm going to put this all over the panels. And you can see that it's not completely opaque, which I love. But remember, I will spray water on this as well before it dries because I don't want to cover so much of the background. And the reason why I do this instead of painting in the areas I want it is I don't want it to look like there's paint strokes anywhere. I want it to be more organic. So you shall see once I spray the water, what it does. So I'm making the busy pattern more gentle to look at, not quite so visually noisy. If I wanted this to be a very bold diptych, I wouldn't have done this. I liked the colors as they were, but because I want this to look very dreamy, romantic, and soft when it's finished, that's the intent here. You can take it any direction you want. You could slap really, really bold blue and green colors on here now and call it a day, and it would be fun. But again, I'm going for a soft, gentle effect. When this is hanging on a wall or sitting on a shelf, I want it to look dreamy and soft. So I'm just using a larger brush at that point to fan it around lightly so that there are no paint strokes and to distribute it evenly. Let's do the same with the second one. And because there's a lot of medium in there, it's a little softer than the white paint that was added in there, so it won't dry as quickly as if I was just doing this with white paint. Oops. I've got to get moving here and get this second one painted over so that I can do my next technique before they both dry. So let's give it a faster coat. As I said, I don't want it to be completely covered like this. I want to make it a little bit more of the background revealed. So let's spray a heavy dose of white water on here and see what happens. It's very wet, and now I use a clean tissue to just I'm hardly touching the panel. The only point is to remove some of that glaze so that a nice rhythm and pattern and movement of this detail moves around the two panels. I don't want it cloudy everywhere. I think you agree that gives, and then it dried even more clear. So I like the effect of that, and you can't do that by just painting in those areas. And now that it's completely dry, if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I love to do tissue prints in white and then paste those with glue them down with medium so that it covers some of the areas in white and reveals backgrounds through all the negative spaces. I just love this technique. It's extremely dramatic, and I really like it. This is kind of a signature thing that I do. So what I'm doing is I've got the two panels butted up together because I want to see how this tissue print fits. And just luckily for me, it fits over the two panels beautifully for the detail I want to show. And I'm just folding along the bottom edge because I will cut that back to give a straight edge of the tissue. It'll just make it easier than cutting that off later. So I'm just moving it around and finding the areas where I want to remove detail. So I'm going to cut the bottom and I'm going to cut up a straight line up the right. But before I do the cutting with the scissors, I want to show you my other trick is to use clean water and a clean brush, and I paint along the negative spaces where I want to tear away the print, the tissue. And I like to do it this way because it keeps a soft organic edge rather than a straight cut line, which may show up later when I glue this tissue down on the panel. If I do it like this, it helps dissolve the paper and makes it a more organic edge. But I will for sure cut a straight line along the bottom because there's a straight edge on the panels, so it will match. So I'm going to cut that. And I cut the left and right sides as well as the middle. So really, I cut along straight with the scissors. the left, the bottom, and the right of each panel, and I've left the top fuzzy because that's got detail on the pattern and print of the tissue, and I don't know what I'm going to do with that later, so I'm just going to leave that and trim it away later where I feel I need to. So I've got fluid matte medium or gloss medium. I'm going to use the gloss medium because it dries a little more clear than the matte medium, and I want to really show you how all those negative spaces in my tissue are going to show up even reveal the background more if I use this glossy version of medium instead of the matte. It will really help that background pop through all those negative spaces. This is where the magic happens, people. This is where it dramatically alters. You see what you've got here, a very busy but delicate background, and now I'm going to put this print over top. All the negative spaces are going to pick up and reveal what's below, and it's going to be just so fun. And that's something that we will achieve that you could not achieve by painting details over top later on. So I'm going to butt up the center lines first because I really want the left and right of this tissue print to line up perfectly when these two panels are put together. So I want to make sure that the right side is perfectly lined up with the panel. Look already the dramatic difference. Isn't that fun? So much fun. Now you could avoid that by just getting a white paintbrush and painting all those details, but they'd be very hard to do. This is so much quicker, so much easier, and it's just such a surprise when you put it down. So what I'm doing is using the flat part of my finger, not my nails, and I'm trying to smooth it out so that I get rid of little wrinkles because the tissue fabric, the paper, wrinkles a little bit, and if you let it dry wrinkled, it's not as nice to look at. So I'm trying to just smooth that out without trying to tear it. So again, it's delicate. Use the flat part of your fingers to do it, and be very careful. So my main intent is to line up that left side first because that has to line up perfectly with the left panel. And then I'm fanning out in all directions so that I get this down. It looked like it pushed away from the edge, so I had to gently lift that up and set it down again. You have to be careful when you do this because that paper is very fragile and you could tear it. And again, now you can see very clearly how the tissue wants to wrinkle once it's been wet with the medium. It's not the end of the world, but if you can use your finger, the flat part of the finger, to spread that down a little bit and flatten it. Again, if you push too hard, you push away the paper and make it tear. So there's a fine line. I've sped this up. Please don't do it that quickly. I only sped it up to speed up the video length. Practice this perhaps the first time on something else so that you get the hang of it, because really that tissue print's that paper is very fragile and it's not dry yet, and so you could push it off. You could push it around and ruin your whole image. So again, I love the balance of this as a whole. If you were to hang these separately, I like the balance of the pattern and the design, but they also look fabulous together as a diptych. Look at the fun that's just done by gluing on a tissue print. You couldn't possibly take a paintbrush and do those wavy lines and have that pattern within the waves. I think that if I was to name this diptych, I would probably call it Gentle Breeze, because it just looks like a gentle breeze blowing over the earth. It might remind you of waves. Who knows what it would remind you of, but I love when there are different options for what people could see. But definitely, to me, this reminds me of a gentle breeze. On water or on the land, it doesn't really matter. It's just, to me, it's the movement and the energy of a gentle breeze. Now I've got this green gold and I've put it in addition. I put it on my finger and I'm spreading it around while the paper's still a bit wet. and that's why it's become so bright. Yeah, when this particular color hits water, it goes very, very citrusy. But I've got to move fairly quickly here because I don't want this to dry. What I want to do is add water and let this disperse. I don't want such a solid hit of green on the bottom. You might like it like that, and that's why I don't mind showing you this way first, because you could say, oh, I like it like that, and leave it. But I'm showing you my technique of putting too much paint down and then removing and leaving what remnants of it below. That's my style. So I'm going to pick up some with paper towel. Because it's starting to dry already, that didn't work very well. So I have to encourage it by spraying water on it. I've got to do both sides, and unfortunately it wasn't as effective on the right. It started to dry too much, but that's okay. I don't see anything as a mistake. Everything leads me to something new. So it started to get a little more random there and lifted some of the color, and especially along this stripe detail with the pattern of the wave, I want to remove any of the paint there because I don't want to cover that fun, busy detail inside the wave. So this is very wet with spray of water, and I'm trying to use my finger, and I'm pressing a little harder on the right there because I'm trying to encourage that paint to lift off the canvas, the panel. It's still darker than I want, so I'm going to keep working at it. I'm going to use rubbing alcohol because that really lifts. You can see it's bubbling up the paint and wanting to lift it. But unfortunately on the right panel, that green got a little drier. I could use some sandpaper and sand it off, but I'm afraid to do that because I don't want to lift the tissue paper. So I'm just doing a lot more work on the right panel to lift some of that color. I don't mind that it's not all lifting, and it won't because it did dry. So now I've got a more subtle organic kind of flow of green paint, helping it along a little bit more, but I think it is what it is now. It's not going to lift anymore. So that's what I have to deal with. So what I'm going to do is use a brush, a soft rigger brush, which is very delicate brush. I like using that when I want to delicately distribute paint throughout a piece. This way you don't get paint strokes. And again, I had sprayed water on the panels so that it's very wet, and I have to lift some of that green. So I'm trying to get a balance of, an asymmetrical balance, if you will, of green throughout the left and right and down the sides before it dries. I sprayed a little more water onto the bottom panel, side of that panel so that I could lift some of that and let it drip down the edges, down to the sides of the panel. And I'm encouraging it with the brush to go underneath, and I'll do the sides as well. And while it's still really wet, when I add this new green, you can see how it spreads beautifully and nice and bright and nice and transparent. So I'm just adding it to the sides wherever it makes sense as a continuation of what the front is doing. This is a real strong pop of green on the bottom, but if you notice throughout the panels up in the top areas there are little smudgy areas where that green pops up, and that gives balance throughout the whole panel. And before it dries, I want to dab more back, and I for sure want to clean up those wavy lines along the bottom of the panel there. I'm encouraging more spreading with the water. And I decided I probably want a little bit more green in a few spots. Just a little bit more movement and play so that I don't just have it bottom heavy with the green. And I don't want the left and right to be identical, so I'm encouraging some of that green to go up to the top right on the right panel. And it goes a little higher than the left panel. But now I'm dabbing most of that back anyway. just dabbing. So I guess the whole purpose is to get a very, very transparent glaze up there and then dab away where I want white. And now before it dries, the best way to do this to clean up those wavy lines is to use a clean toothpaste, tooth. Okay, let's start over. Using a clean swab, and I'm pressing very firmly because I want to lift any of that glaze that went within the wavy lines. Q-tip is what I was trying to think of. Q-tips are a great little tool if you want to lift paint off. So there we go. It's a lot more organic now. You've got white on the bottom, but it also talks to some of the green hits of color on the top. This is getting to be quite fun. I know I don't need to do too much more to this because it's already doing what I want it to do. Now I want to do a similar technique on the top part of the panels. So I'm getting that Paynes gray in a dish with a lot of water because that was a very high pigment paint and I do not want it to be really dark. I'm going to test it on a piece of paper. That's a little dark. I want it to be it will go dark, I'll dab it back, but I would need a lot more water so that this goes on as a much more transparent glaze. That's a little bit brighter, and it will dry lighter. I love this color. So I'm using that rigger brush again to delicately, and I sped this up. I did not paint that quickly. If you paint that quickly with a gel, such a watery glaze, it would splash everywhere. So that was sped up. And now I'm using a tissue to do the same thing, dabbing gently wherever I want to lift the darkest areas of that blue. Now let's do the sides, down the edges. Wherever it makes sense. And I'll dab a little bit of that as well. Now you see that dark blue is clinging to the wrinkles of the tissue. I don't want that effect because I don't want to make it too apparent that the tissue paper was used. So I'm going to dab some of that back so that those wrinkles aren't so obvious. That helped. And you can see that I've just given a really, with everything that I painted on there, most of that got lifted off, but it gave me a really super, super transparent glaze that I just love. Absolutely love how this is turning out. I've got all the sides done. I've got my signature on the bottom because if you do hang this as a diptych, I don't want my signature on both of them to show up, so they're on the bottom. And if somebody buys them individually, then each panel has my signature on it. I want to just do a little bit of touch up. I love it as it is, but I want to touch up a little bit of white just to bring it forward a little bit and add a little more depth and layer. In adding a little more white to the surface, smooths out some of that tissue, effect of the tissue, and it also makes some of that detail pop forward and give more dimension and interest to the panels. I'm using a very, very soft, not a rigger brush, but it's a shorter bristles, but it's very, very soft because I do not want to see paint strokes here. I want it to blend almost like a more opaque glaze. I'm going up along the top edge of the detail there, and then I'm fanning it out so that it disappears. I don't want this to look like a solid patch of white. I want it to look cloudy. I'm pressing hard along the detail, the lines, and then I'm smudging away with my finger because I don't want it to be a strong ridge of white. I want it to be subtle, a subtle blending into this heavier white into the middle of these areas. And I want to bring the brush over to the right of the panel so that the eye goes all the way from the left to the right. And it also helps it join the left panel to the right panel. Notice how I fanned it out at the bottom area there. I didn't do much on the bottom white areas. Let's do something similar over here. I'm following along that line, but I'm pressing very lightly on the brush. Now there's not as much white in this right panel, so I have to be careful where I put this, but I do want the left and right to touch in the middle there and join and continue the rhythm and the movement across the two. And then what I do is I don't add any more white paint, and I'm fanning it away so that it's stronger on the top parts and then fans away to nothing in the bottom. And even here, I don't really want to highlight too much the edges of the white. So what I'm going to do is smudge it away so that it's more organic and fades away. So this hit of white that I've added is extremely subtle. I need to bring the eye over to the far right so that the movement goes all the way from left and right panels. But I want to do it subtle, and I don't want strong lines here, so I'm going to wipe away the paint off the brush and dab it down and press hard so that it just fans it out delicately and then it disappears. So I think that slight little hit of white is what this needed. And because I want to keep this diptych very soft and romantic and delicate, I am finished. So here's how the left stands alone. Here's how the right stands alone as a single. And then if you hang them together as a diptych, you can see that the pattern moves across in these gentle waves of wind, and it works wonderfully. I appreciate your support. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe because it'll help you get notified when I have new weekly videos. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again for your support, and I'll see you on the next video.